this video, we will focus on positive behavior management. This video discusses instructional control, the Stoic framework, and functions of behavior. So, what exactly is instructional control? Put simply, instructional control is a positive working relationship. Instructional control means your students are learning what they need to. It means your learner will respond consistently when presented with any tasks or demands and maintains the same level of responding throughout the teaching session. It means the students enjoy their time with you. How do you know if you have instructional control? Well, think about the children that you work with and ask yourself, when I call on a child's name, do they come to me or do they run away? When the children see me, are they interested in the learning experiences I'm bringing? Or do the children think of me as the one who makes life less fun, the one who takes away their toys and makes them do work? How we set up our environments and build relationships matter. Instructional control should be your first goal when working with a student. An article written by Robert Schramm outlines the 7 steps to gaining instructional control with your learner. This article is a great resource for both professionals and parents. It was written with ideas for parents of young children with autism, but the principles apply in all adult-to-children interactions. As this video progresses, we will touch base on the 7 different areas of instructional control. The 7 areas are to control reinforcement, pair yourself and have fun, be consistent, practice compliance, vary reinforcement, understand your students' needs, and be careful what you reinforce. The first step to gaining instructional control is to control the reinforcers. Well, what is a reinforcer? Reinforcers work by design to increase behavior and the possibility that the behavior will happen again in the future. A reinforcer could be many things. Some examples include verbal praise, access to preferred items or activities, edible food, or access to preferred adults. How do we determine what are reinforcers for individual learners? You can ask the learner or those who are familiar with the learner, observe the student in their natural setting, review records, or complete a preference assessment. Once you have established reinforcers, show your students that you are the one in control of the reinforcers. Put preferred items out of reach. In a locked cabinet, you can put the items in a teacher's desk, you can put the items behind curtains, you can even use passwords for electronics. No free access to reinforcers should be given. Expectations must be met for a learner to earn a reinforcer. This provides multiple communication opportunities across the day. When first establishing instructional control, you should be careful not to give too many demands too fast. As you continue to work with the learner, you should slowly increase the amount of demands before they get access to the preferred item. Place limitations on the reinforcers. Set a time limit with a timer to keep it consistent. Set a limit on the number of food items a child gets at one specific time. Require the child to choose different reinforcers, often to avoid satiation on one reinforcer. The second step to gaining instructional control is to pair yourself and have fun. What is pairing? Pairing is the process in which you connect yourself or you pair yourself with all of the learner's favorite items and activities, or their reinforcers. Through these repeated connections, you end up taking the value of all the good stuff. You become the reinforcer, or the giver of all good things. And when you're the reinforcer, students will perform or behave for you. You can use the pairing process with everything. You can establish yourself as a reinforcer, your voice, your classroom, instruction, new toys or games by pairing them with already established reinforcers. Have fun. Build rapport with the learner. Show the child that you are fun. Not everyone will like you right away. You will need to figure out what they like and what types of interactions they prefer. This will change based on age level. Have fun in the work area. Make learning fun and make interactions enjoyable. When pairing, initially present no demands, just encouraging statements and comments. Wow, that looks fun. Oh my gosh, you're so good at that game. Hand them the pieces that they need to complete their fun activity without requiring them to do anything. Your goal is for them to see you as this fun person who gives me all of the things that they like. By pairing yourself with these things that they like, you and your voice will become a reinforcer. A 3-to-1 ratio of positive statements to corrections is extremely important. Think of this as filling up their piggy bank with tons of positive statements. So when you have to correct a misbehavior, the positive working relationship is more likely to be maintained. Be careful not to dip into a negative balance. They may then begin to resist you. If you have a challenging learner, you may need a higher ratio, such as 5-to-1 positive to correctives, or even 9-to-1 positive to correctives. The third step to gaining instructional control is to be consistent. Show the student that you can be trusted. Always say what you mean and mean what you say. Follow through with your expectations. No access to reinforcement should be granted unless directives have been followed. Deliver the reinforcer quickly after the completion of the task. You may have to prompt the student to complete a task if necessary. Be consistent across all behaviors. Establishing instructional control means establishing trust. For example, you tell a student to clean up his toy train before taking out the marble run. He doesn't listen and walks over to the marble run to get it out of the box. You should immediately block the access of the marble run until he puts the train away. You may even have to help him start putting the train away or finish putting the train away. Follow through is crucial. Allow access to the marble run immediately after he finishes cleaning up the train so that he knows that you can be trusted. Fourth step to gaining instructional control is to practice compliance. It's important to practice compliance in a positive way so that when you have to follow through with an expectation, the student's more likely to comply with it because they have a history of positive experiences with you. Embed opportunities for students to follow your directions throughout the day during highly preferred times and activities. For example, when it's time to line up for recess, play a game where the student follows your directions in order to line up. For students who read or write, writing an expectation on a whiteboard is a quick way to make a behavior contract when a situation arises. With younger learners or ones with limited reading skills, pictures and first then boards are a good option. Resist giving students what they want before compliance occurs. For instance, saying, "Fine, you can have 1 more minute on the computer, but then you have to do your math," thinking that the child will then complete their math, is not going to work out. This is bribery and it teaches children to negotiate with us. Instead, say something along the lines of, "First math, then computer time." Ignore the whining and minor misbehaviors and block access. Sometimes kids have learned what a direction sounds like and automatically will resist. Sneaky compliance is a way that teaches kids to comply with a direction without even realizing it. By sneaking in what you're hiding, the fact that you are asking them to do something. Sneaking demands in right before granting access to a preferred item, such as the student wants the iPad. You say, "Sure, just bring me your workbook and you can have it." Finally, it's important to be non-emotional. Use a quiet voice and look them in the eyes. Give the child time to process the request. If you need to correct behavior, do it briefly, calmly, consistently, respectfully, and privately. The fifth step in gaining instructional control is to vary reinforcement. Play grandma. Yeah, you heard me right. I said play grandma. Grandma always gives in when she's asked. She slips the cookie, slides over the $5 bill, and Grandma's motto is, "Ask and you shall receive." This puts you in a position where the learner can trust your reinforcer delivery and you're naturally pairing yourself. But it's extremely important to know when to put a limit on it. Use those bigger reinforcers, those more valuable reinforcers, like playing basketball with the custodian for the bigger and harder skills. Use the smaller reinforcers, like access to an edible, for an easier, less demanding skill. It all depends on the student. In the early stages of gaining instructional control, use very high rates of reinforcement. Every correct response, every unprompted response, every expectation is met. Later, when the student is consistently meeting expectations, switch it up. Slowly increase the amount of time before delivering reinforcement. The sixth step to gaining instructional control is to understand your students' needs. Get to know your students like the back of your hand. Compliance does not come before meeting the students' needs. This takes a lot of practice. Ask yourself, what am I teaching in this particular moment? Am I teaching the learner to sit in their chair during group, or am I teaching the learner the content of the story? Frequent corrections for things you are not particularly focused on can get in the way of teaching the skill you want to be teaching in that moment. Do I want the learner to write multiple sentences, or do I want the learner to focus on grammar and punctuation? These are questions you need to be constantly asking yourself. Ask yourself, what's the priority for this learner right now? Know your target goals at all times. The seventh and final step to gaining instructional control is to be careful what you reinforce. If you want to see more of a behavior, then reinforce it. We are reinforcing our students all day, every day, without even knowing it. We're praising students for small skills that they demonstrate, which increases the likelihood that they'll engage in those behaviors again. For instance, a student might be crawling around the classroom, so you remove the student from the room. But guess what? He didn't want to do the activity anyways, so you just reinforced crawling around the room. Be careful of inadvertent reinforcement. Positive reinforcement will be linked to the most recent behavior. Here's an example of a behavior chain. This example is very specific. Say you're teaching a student to give personal space to others. So when the students get too close to each other, he's prompted to back up. When he backs up, you say, nice job giving space. But you might have just reinforced the entire behavior of 1, he gets too close. 2, he receives attention from an adult through redirection. And 3, he backs up. So he might be learning that, I can get attention from an adult simply through getting too close to a friend. If you don't want to see more of a specific behavior, do not reinforce it. Here are some non-examples that might hinder your instructional control: arguing and debating with students, bargaining and compromising, inconsistency across staff, giving attention to minor inappropriate behaviors, avoiding demands to avoid problem behaviors, lack of structure and expectations, empty threats and promises. If you find yourself stuck in these examples, take a step back and see where you can repair the relationship so that when you can reestablish instructional control. What's the key to juggling all your students' needs? The key is to know that some of the balls you're juggling are made of plastic and some are made of glass. And if you drop a plastic ball, it bounces back, no harm done. But if you drop a glass ball, it shatters. It needs more time, effort, and resources to repair. We're not just talking juggling 5 balls. We're juggling 50, and the balls don't just represent work or just family. They are separate balls and they represent all of those categories. Jimmy has a visual schedule with a break. Sarah's mom requested extra homework. Your daughter has a dance recital. We're going to drop more than one ball. It's inevitable. If we drop a plastic one, it'll bounce back, and we'll be okay. We just need to be mindful of the glass ones. Think equity, not equality. Stoic. What we do impacts students' behavior. In the last 5 years, 5 million new teachers have entered the teaching profession in the USA. 96% of these teachers chose teaching as something they would love to do. 14% of these teachers leave the profession during the first year. 46% of these teachers exited the profession by the 5th year. This study was done in 2010. So imagine the last 15 years what those numbers would change to be. I can assure you that these numbers have increased across the board. The PBIS framework believes that all children can learn good behavior if intervention occurs early. PBIS is a multi-tier system of supports and uses problem-solving methods for decision-making. The PBIS framework is evidence-based. You can use it to monitor student progress and inform your instruction. PBIS provides data to make decisions for change. And finally, PBIS can be used as an assessment for different purposes. PBIS is not a quick fix to complex problems. It is not a packaged program. PBIS is not only a reinforcement system. PBIS does not include consequences for misbehavior. And finally, PBIS is not only for classroom management. Before we get into Stoic, think about how you are controlling your instruction. It seems contradictory from the last part of this presentation about instructional control, but we can't control another person's behavior. What we can do is control the environmental variables and how we respond to them in the moment. Simple solutions often include over-relying on punishment. By definition, punishment results in a temporary decrease in behavior. It works at first and typically has a neutral impact. At best, it stops misbehavior, but it does not teach a replacement behavior. Punitive consequences are not enough. Role-bound power or wishing and hoping are not enough. You have to give a concerted and consistent effort in trying something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. And continue to try new things until you find something that works. By definition, stoic means remaining unemotional, unruffled, calm, firmly restraining in response to pain or distress. Stoic means showing an admirable patience and endurance in the face of adversity. Remember, we can't control a person's behavior, but we can control the environmental variables and how we respond to a behavior. Safe and Civil Schools developed a framework for designing and implementing comprehensive interventions. These interventions are based on what research says is highly effective, instead of just reactive techniques. There are 5 key variables to manipulate in order to promote more responsible student behavior. The acronym used to describe these variables is STOIC. S. Structure. Organize all school and classroom settings for success. T. Teach. Teach students how to behave responsibly in all settings. O. Observe. Observe student behavior. Supervise everybody. I. Interact. Interact positively with the student. C. Correct. Correct irresponsible behavior fluently, calmly, consistently, briefly, immediately, and respectfully. Thinking about the 2 initial definitions of STOIC, emotions tend to erode our delivery of STOIC variables. Because we know most staff know the concepts, but they're not necessarily doing these things. We can look at the STOIC framework for school-wide improvement, classroom management, interventions for one student. A great way to determine which areas of the framework could be better in your classroom is to use the STOIC checklist. This can also be modified for remote learning. Structure for success. You can identify and modify variables that positively influence student behavior, such as the physical setting, schedules, routines, organize classroom procedures like attention signals, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, 1, 2, eyes on you. Be overly prepared and overly organized. Think about a place like Disney World. It's so crowded all the time and most likely very hot. So how is it enjoyable to its patrons, and why do people keep coming back? Disney World is a well-structured environment. Their lines are compact and nicely maintained. They have air-conditioned spaces and constant entertainment. All of these structures are used to reduce the degree to your wait time, taking away from your experience. So, think about your classroom or the classrooms you work in. Consider the schedules, the physical space, the attention signals, and ask yourself these questions. What is working well? What could use improvements? And how will this differ with remote learning? A common assumption is that we think we know what students know. We have to teach our students how to behave respectfully and responsibly. They don't know this automatically. You have to teach the specific skills and behavioral expectations that you want your students to be able to do. By teaching these skills and behavioral expectations, you will see success in your classroom. Be sure the behavioral expectations are detailed and clear for students. It's a good idea to explain what a behavioral expectation looks like and what a behavioral expectation sounds like. For example, to be safe during dismissal, a student behavior might look like hands and body to self, stay with your group, hold on to your belongings, walk not run, use your locker safely. The behavioral expectation to be safe during dismissal might sound like using a level 0 or 1 voice, tell an adult if there's an emergency. In addition to explaining what student behaviors look like and sound like, be sure to teach staff what their behavioral expectations are as well. How will they be used to support student behaviors? Make sure student behavioral expectations are age appropriate and reasonable in your environment. Be sure that all behavioral expectations for students are known by all staff members who may be in that setting. It is crucial that everyone is on the same page. Think about the classrooms at their own independent levels. Each teacher needs the professional latitude or freedom and capacity to set up their own unique classroom structure, and it's based on style, needs of students, subjects, grade levels, or even their own past history for what works well. Classrooms are idiosyncratic and unique, and expectations must be explicitly taught to accommodate those differences. What framework does this remind you of? If you said CHAMPS, then you are correct. Many classrooms utilize CHAMPS as a way to help teach students behavioral expectations for day-to-day classroom activities. You post or present the expectations visually for students to see. You teach the expectations. You review the expectations frequently. You monitor student progress towards demonstrating those behavioral expectations. And finally, you provide feedback to your students on the following behavioral expectations. Observe and monitor. Everyone behaves better when you're being observed. For example, you clean your house and keep it neater when you have company coming over, or you stay closer to the speed limit when police officers are around. Students typically behave differently when being observed or monitored. We want to use effective supervision techniques. Without consistent monitoring, even responsible adults will push the limits. Consider the number of supervisors you have. What is the schedule for your supervisors? Are all supervisors assigned to specific areas or zones? Are supervisors trained to use emergency communication procedures? Are all supervisors aware of the explicit details of their job? Are supervisors provided with the necessary training and materials to do their job? Think about all of the classrooms and the individual levels. Staff must be physically circulating the room and visually scanning student behaviors. They say that the saying, eyes in the back of her head, is used because teachers are so connected to everything that's going on in their classroom. A common question that often comes up is, but can't we just get students to behave without needing adult supervision? Think about Lord of the Flies. Children need the systematic civilizing presence of adults to communicate how civilized society works. The same concept works for the classroom. Students need a systematic structure and the presence of adults to communicate how the classroom functions. Model the core belief that all students must be treated with respect. We want to provide positive attention and specific, descriptive feedback on behavior when students behave responsibly. Just like with gaining instructional control, we want to maintain a high ratio of positive to corrective interactions. The golden ratio of 3-to-1 positives to correctives should be used. Remember, you're filling up their piggy bank with tons of positive statements, so when you have to correct a misbehavior, the positive working relationship is more likely to be maintained. Be careful not to dip into a negative balance. They may begin to resist you. If you have a challenging learner, you may have to increase the ratios to a 5-to-1 positive to correctives, or even to 9-to-1 positive to correctives. A non-contingent positive interaction is when adults provide ongoing brief reinforcement to a student independent of the student's behavior. For example, ask how a club or activity is going, or something as simple as asking how a student's weekend was. When adults pay more attention to positive behavior than to misbehavior, it increases students' motivation to behave positively. This concept is proven by research. Research says that the teacher attention is perhaps the most basic of all influences on student behaviors, and the systematic use of attention should characterize every teacher's classroom repertoire. This video shares a variety of different ways that you can use non-contingent interactions with your students, whether you are in person in the building or via remote learning. Susan Isaacs from Safe and Civil Schools said, It's easy to believe that having a classroom full of positive interactions springs from having responsible students who are exceedingly well behaved and responsible. Yet, in reality, the belief is exactly backwards. In truth, positive interactions are more like the fuel that drives good behavior and personal responsibility. The criticism trap, as Dr. Wesley Becker calls it. The more a teacher reprimands, the more misbehavior occurs. Conversely, the more a teacher praises appropriate behavior, the more the behavior occurs. One major reason we fall into the criticism trap is that when student behavior is going well, we're not thinking about behavior management. Another reason is that most of the time, when we reprimand a student, most students do what we ask. Thus, student behavior after being reprimanded reinforces us for reprimanding because it worked. The thing is, reprimanding the child did not change the behavior. The behavior will happen again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. Reprimanding is not teaching them anything, instead, just momentarily stopping the inappropriate behavior. A third reason we fall into the criticism trap is that we have to give corrections when correctives are necessary. And given that most students change their behavior when corrected, we need to be cognizant of the criticism trap. Let's see if you can guess whether or not these non-contingent interactions are negative or positive. Rachel gets up to sharpen her pencil, although you had stated that no movement was permitted during a certain class activity. You walk over to Rachel and remind her gently that she needs to return to her seat. Ask yourself, did the student get the attention while engaging in a positive behavior or a negative behavior? Jose finishes his independent work early, gets out a novel, and reads to himself. You give Jose a homework pass for finishing his work and staying quiet while other students work. Travis picks up some trash in the hallway. You thank him for picking up trash and ask him how his classes are going. Is this a positive or a negative interaction? Ask yourself, did Travis get attention while engaging in a positive behavior or a negative behavior? Jamal arrives at your classroom door. You compliment him on his touchdown the night before at the big rivalry game, and then you ask him to please stop running in the hallways. Ask yourself this question: did Jamal get attention while engaging in positive behavior or negative behavior? Is this a positive or a negative interaction? Hannah steps out of line and jostles the students around her 4 times in the cafeteria. You move Hannah to the front of the line where you can watch her more closely. Is this a negative or a positive interaction? Hannah maintains her place in line, including appropriate spacing behind the student in front of her. You allow Hannah to go to the front of the line next. Is this a positive or a negative interaction? Heather got out of her seat to pass a note to a classmate. You give Heather a reminder of the expectations and ask her to return to her seat. Is this a positive or a negative interaction? Heather gets out of her seat to pass a note to a classmate. You give Matthew, her classmate, a reward ticket for staying in his seat. Is this a positive or a negative reaction with Heather? Is this a positive or a negative interaction with Matthew? Jordan helps a struggling classmate out with a question on an assignment. You thank Jordan for helping the student and you ask him to get back to his seat. Is this a positive or a negative interaction with Jordan? Correct fluently. React to misbehavior calmly, consistently, briefly, immediately, respectfully, and concisely. Use clear and simple language for common corrections. Phrase them positively as do statements, not don't statements. Be as brief as possible. Students should know exactly what is being asked of them when the statement is made. Use one-liners and motions together. Respect the bubble. Stay seated. One ear, please. Voice level 2. Eyes watching. Bodies calm. In part 3 of this presentation, we will focus on the functions of behavior, why we do what we do. ABC data collection refers to antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. It consists of recording antecedents, or what environmental variables are observed immediately before a challenging behavior occurs, what the challenging behavior looks like, and the consequences, or what environmental variables are observed immediately after challenging behavior occurs. This data is then analyzed to determine antecedents occurring before a behavior that might affect the motivation for an individual to engage in that specific behavior. This data is also used to determine the function of a behavior. This explains why the individual is doing what they are doing. We will learn more about functions of behavior later in this presentation. Let's take a look at an example of ABC data collection.
Okay, it's time to go to sleep. Gotta go brush your teeth. Not right now. Tomorrow. No apples. It's bedtime. You can have water. All right, let's go brush teeth. This way.
Create a reinforcement system to motivate your learner. Reinforcement is an effect. Reinforcement is a process that causes an increase in the future frequency of the behavior. You can be systematic about delivering reinforcement or let it occur naturally. Either way, reinforcement processes are always occurring around all of us every single day. Reinforcement is an essential part to learning and increasing appropriate behaviors. Punishment is the process in which adding or removing a stimulus decreases the likelihood that the target behavior will not occur again in the future. Setting expectations. Many parents and teachers set rules or expectations for students that may include what a student will receive if they follow that expectation. If the expectation is set up prior to the demonstration of the behavior, then this is reinforcement. For example, at the beginning of math, you state, if you complete this math worksheet, I'm going to give you time outside. If the promise of a preferred activity or item is given after a challenging behavior has started, then that becomes a bribe. Let's say the same child is given a math worksheet. The child begins to clean their desk area instead of starting the worksheet. You go over and you say something along the lines of, if you do your math worksheet, then we can go outside. Because it occurred after the problem behavior of cleaning their desk, this just became a bribe. Finally, a threat occurs after challenging behavior has already begun. If you don't stop crying, then you won't get the iPad. An attention-based behavior can be observed when a person engages in a behavior to gain attention from others. This behavior is socially mediated. For example, when no one is giving attention to a girl and she starts to scream. Then someone gives her attention as a result of the screaming. They are reinforcing her behavior and the likelihood that screaming will happen again in the future by giving her attention. Escape-maintained behavior can be observed when one engages in a behavior to escape a situation. This behavior is socially mediated. For example, a girl might leave her classroom when presented with a math worksheet. Upon returning to the classroom, the girl is told the math worksheet is taken away and she does not have to complete it. The behavior of leaving the classroom is maintained and more likely to occur again in the future when she's looking to escape another math worksheet or a different activity. Access to tangibles can be observed when a person engages in a behavior to gain access to a preferred item or activity. This behavior is socially mediated. For example, a boy might engage in crying behavior to gain access to popcorn at the movies. When his mother buys the popcorn, she is reinforcing his crying and the likelihood that crying will happen again in the future to gain access to popcorn. A sensory-based behavior can be observed when a person engages in a behavior because it makes him or her feel good. The behavior is not socially mediated. It provides him or her stimulation to the body. Therefore, it reinforces the behavior automatically. So, in this video, we saw a child demonstrate tantrum behavior. The observable behaviors we saw included screaming, crying, and laying on the floor. We saw the behavior stop when the adult left the room. The child then sought the adult out and continued the tantrum behavior. What is the function? If you said attention, then you are correct. In this video, we saw a child demonstrate tantrum behavior in the grocery store. The observable behaviors we saw included screaming, crying, laying on the floor, and throwing items. Prior to the behavior starting, we saw the child put a bag of chips in the cart and his parent take the bag of chips out and put it back on the shelf. What is the function? If you said access to tangible, then you were right.
Hey, what's up, buddy? Are you okay? What?
In this video, we saw a child demonstrate tantrum behavior. The observable behaviors we saw were screaming, crying, and laying on the bed. Prior to the behavior starting, the child was given a demand to complete a task on the computer. What is the function? If you said escape, awesome job. In all three videos, we saw tantrum behavior. We observed the same behaviors such as screaming, crying, and laying on the floor or bed. Even though the topographies were the same, meaning that the behaviors looked alike, the function was different. Each episode of tantrum behavior served each child a different function: to gain attention, to gain access to a tangible, or to escape a demand. Knowing how to determine these differences helps us to decide how to respond to behavior in order to decrease the disruptive behaviors and increase the behaviors we want to see.